Welcome to another day in the shop. Today we're going to make the barbecue flipper. The barbecue flipper is made out of stainless steel for the blade, and it has a 1/4-inch steel handle, and it has some plastic over top of the handle so that it gives you something to hang on to that doesn't get rusty in the weather outside. And we're going to fasten it all together with a couple of rivets, these Tinner's rivets. And before we do all of the fastening, we have to do all the manufacturing, the drilling the holes, the cutting, and the angling of all of the different pieces. So to start off with, I've got a template here, and the template shows me the general shape and the measurements that have to be used in order to cut the blade to the right shape. At one end of the blade, it's going to be tapered, so it's a little smaller up at the handle end, and it's a little bigger down at the end that touches the barbecue. Also, at the end that is near the handle, there are going to be a couple of little round corners, just to give it a little bit of a decoration there. And you can see here, it's kind of rounded off here, and at the other end, it's going to be squared off. So those are two things that are part of the project that we need to have done. So to start off with, the template shows us that we need to start at one corner of the piece of metal, and we need to go up to the other end and cut off a triangle, and at the other end the triangle is 10 millimeters in from the end. So we're working with metric measurements here, millimeters in measuring off the blade. So here I've got a piece of stainless steel. Stainless steel is harder than ordinary steel, and usually it's the kind of metal you see in your kitchen sink, and spoons and forks and things like that that are cheap, and they don't rust. That's the benefit of stainless steel. So I'm going to measure off 10 millimeters. So I've got myself a measuring device here, and I'll have a little felt pen, and at one end 10 millimeters in from the edge there, 10 millimeters, and the other one 10. Now these pieces of stainless steel that I'm starting with, let's give you the measurement here. We've got about 10 centimeters, so that's 100 millimeters by about 140. So 140 millimeters by 100 millimeters, and if you want it in inches, that's 4 inches by 5.5. So 4 inches by 5 1/2, and that's a good starting size if you're going to cut your own. So I've got the little marks 10 millimeters in, and those lines, let me just change pens here to black, makes it easier to see. Those dots I'm going to connect down to the corner at the far end, there, and here. So if we can see that there. So it's going to be thinner at this end, and this is where the handle is going to come out, and down at this end is where it's going to be scraping on the barbecue. So now we need to cut that off, and we'll go over to the bench shear, which is a very large pair of scissors mounted on a bench, and we'll cut that off on the bench shear. There we have our lines going down there. This is a very large blade in behind this guard, and the blade moves up and down as I move this lever, and all I need to do is to shove the steel back in, and I'm looking down this crack here, and I can see the felt pen line that I made, and there it is there. Hold this, pull down on the blade, and it cuts that off, and there's the one side, and I turn it around to the other side. I look down there once again, and I trim it off. Now the two pieces that I cut off are right there, and you can see that that is what I'm working with now. So there we've got the flipper blade cut, and we've got it into a shape that has a smaller end at this end and a larger end at that end. Now we need to do some more measurements. Taking a look at our template again, the template says that there are various lines on here, and the intersection of those lines is what determines where the holes are going to be drilled. and the holes are there because the grease needs to drip through, and then at the other end the holes need to be drilled so that the handle can be fastened onto it. So I'm going to use a special tool called a divider. This divider looks like your compass that you're used to seeing, but it just has two scratching ends on it. So I'm going to set up the legs of the divider so that they are 20 millimeters apart. So there is a distance of 20 millimeters. And now all I have to do in order to draw these lines is I drag one of the legs along the side of the piece of metal very lightly because it puts a little scratch there. And as long as I've dragged the legs along the side and the other leg touches onto the flat portion, it'll put a little scratch that's exactly 20 millimeters away. And I do the same for the bottom because I need another 20 from the bottom. Now I take the ruler again and I remeasure so that this time I have 40 millimeters. And once again, that wasn't 40, that was only 30, 10, 20. So now I've got 40 and I put a little scratch there, so I've got 20 and 20, and I don't need one along the sides because all I need to do now is measure the center. I need to have one more measurement, which is 60, 10, 20, 20. That the one there? There we go. So now I have 3 lines going across, and you can see that in the reflection there on the camera. The center line you're going to have to measure. That's just the way it's going to have to go. So I'm going to measure halfway, and I said this one turned out to start off to be about 101 or 102, so halfway is right there. And at the other end, whatever half is, half of 80, 40 millimeters. And this one I can just draw a line with my felt down the center. Okay, so now I've got all of those intersections of the points marked out. So I take a center punch. Center punch here has a sharp point at one end, and it's heavy steel, and I put a center punch mark at the intersection of each of those sets of lines that I just put on there. And when you put center punch marks on, don't hit several times. If you hit twice even, it's likely to bounce. So what you want to do is you just hit once at each of those points. So I've got my 9 holes marked out, and at the other end I need to mark out for the handle. Again, take a look at the template here, and this time I need to make it 15 millimeters away from the end along the center line. So whether you use a measuring tool or the calipers, it doesn't make too much difference. I just want to know a point 15 millimeters down that line, and I'm going to mark that off. So there we go. I'm now ready to do all of the drilling of the holes. So we need to find drill bits. Now, you can use a drill index. If you've got a box of drill bits that you really don't know exactly what size they are, you can use a drill index, and you can start taking drill bits and poking them into the holes of the drill index, and pretty soon you're going to find the right size. The 2 sizes that we need for this project are 3/16 of an inch and 1/8 of an inch. It's important that the 1/8 drills on the small hole. If we drill a 3/16 up there, you're not going to have enough thickness in the rod to hold a 3/16 rivet. So we need a 1/8 hole up at the top and 3/16 down at the bottom. So let's head over to the drill press. So here we are at the drill press, and we need to drill these holes. This is a 1/8 drill bit. It's already in my drill press, tightened up in the chuck. And there's no way that you're going to hang on to this piece of stainless steel because it's going to want to spin on you. So you cannot hang onto this with your hand. What you need to do is we'll take one of these large vice grips with the big jaws on it, and we'll clamp down onto the project like this. Now it's not going anywhere, and I can align my drill press up with that center punch mark that I put there. If you don't have center punch marks, the drill press and the bit wants to travel all over the place. So here we are, we're going to drill this 1/8. After it goes through, just raise it up and down. This is going to clean the hole out. Just clean it out a little bit better for the rivet. Now let's drill the other holes on the other side, and we need to change the drill bits. So we'll just change the drill bit to the 3/16, and I take the key and I take this drill bit out of here. Once again, let's make sure that we're hanging on to the project nice and tight, because we don't want this to travel away on us. And you see there, it just rotated a little bit. I need to tighten that up just a little bit more. There we go. Clean it out a little bit. Stainless steel is fairly brittle. It's a lot harder than regular steel. So when you're drilling, you want to make sure you've got your safety glasses on, because those little chips can fly up, and they're sharp like razor blades and also hot. They'll hurt your eyes. So there I've got 9 holes drilled with 3/16, and at the other end I have the 1/8. This is a Beverly Shear. It's got a lever that moves up and down, and it just works like an ordinary pair of scissors, except that it's pretty heavy duty and you can cut fairly thick metal with it. The design of this, it's a little bit curved. The design is so that you can cut curves on the metal. It's not really for cutting straight cuts, it's for cutting round corners. So I'll take a coin, and I'll set my coin on there just so you can see it. And I put it up there in the corner, and I'm just going to trace a round corner there, and I'm going to trace a round corner here. And it gives me an idea of where I need to do the cuts. So I take a large lever, big pipe here, and I put it into the handle portion of the shear, and I start to cut. Let's see if I can get that. Just a little bit of a pull, and now as I pull down with my right hand to close the scissor portion, I'm going to turn with my left hand. And as I turn the piece of steel, I get a nice cut. And I'm going to do the same thing for the other corner. Just to get it started. And a slow cut and a slow rotation. And that's what you should have, is a nice cut. And now that's on the narrow portion of the blade. The wide portion of the blade stays square. Here we have the blade, and it's got our curves on the corners. That's all cut. We've got the 1/8 of an inch hole for the handle, and we've got the 3/16 holes for the fat to drip through. But these are very sharp, because when they were drilled, there are all kinds of burrs sticking out. So let's go over to the vise, and we're going to fasten this into the vise and do a little bit of grinding. You can file it, but you might scratch it all up. I'm going to use a Dremel or a die grinder, and it's got a stone in the end, and this stone is going to do the grinding. I'm wearing safety glasses. We're going to create a lot of sparks here. So I hold my one hand up against the vise so that I know that things aren't going to move, and the other hand is holding on to the die grinder. That's pretty good. Each of the holes has a little bit of a dimple. So I'm going to just set it onto the table, and the dimple is in from that side, and this side is sticking out. So I'm just going to tap it. So I'm just going to tap it down so that they're flat. Now I can feel that I need to go back to the other side with the die grinder and just do a wee little bit of grinding just to smoothen that out as well. Turn that around, and I've got a 1/8 hole on the other end. You can die grind that one too. Perfect. So we're almost ready, but if I run my hand along the edge of this, I notice that some of this is still pretty sharp. So because it's sharp because of the cutting tools that I used, and I need to use a file to clean that up just a little bit. You'll notice on the vise, I'm not clamping my project right into the vise. I have some soft jaws. Soft jaws are just a couple of scrap pieces of metal that are softer than the metal that I'm clamping into the vise. So the stainless steel is hard, and I've got some aluminum or light gauge metal there to absorb any of the marks that the vise might put into it. So now I'm going to take a file, and it has a medium to fine tooth on it, and I'm just going to go around the corners here. That's a lot better. Before I could have cut my finger open on those corners. Let's just do the other one. Doesn't take much. A file cuts when you push, so there's no use me pulling. It cuts when I push. There we go. So those corners are done. Now if I run my hands over the edge of where I did the angle cut, on one side it's smooth. The other side, I can catch a fingernail on it. So that, I just need to do a little bit of filing on that as well, just at an angle. And let's see if I can put that in there. Just at an angle so that I get rid of that edge that's showing. Same thing on this side. You could have it clamped in the vise or the hand works. Wow, that's pretty good. And a little bit on that one. Down there on the bottom. Perfect. Now I'm ready to fasten on the handle. Of course, we have to make the handle before we fasten it on. Here's a piece of handle material. This is a rod, let's give you a measurement, about 21 inches long. 21 inches long, it's a 1/4 inch mild rolled steel. And we're going to turn this into the handle. First, on the end of the rod is a little burr. This particular rod was cut off with a cut-off saw, not a hacksaw, so it's got a very sharp burr on the end. And the other end needs to be done as well. That's it. I take the rod, and if I look at my template, the template that I've got here shows that I have some measurements on it. And I need to put some marks onto this rod at these distances. 1 inch, 3 inches, 3 inches, 3 inches, and 1 inch. Don't trust the template. Always go to your measuring tools to measure out distances. So there is 1 inch, another 3 inches from that first 1 inch gives me at the 4, another 3 inches, another 3 inches, and then 1. So is it pretty close? Yeah, it's pretty close. So 1, 3, 3, 3, 1. Those are the locations where I'm going to bend this when I put it into the forge. Now there's no way the felt pen is going to stay there. As soon as I put it into the forge, the felt pen is going to melt away pretty quickly. So what I need to do is to go to my vise. I don't need the soft jaws right now. I'll just fasten this into the vise. There we go. And I take a file, and usually at the corners of the file, it's a triangle corner. So I'll just put a little notch there, 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 and the last one, there. So now I've got notches at each of those locations. So now the thing is that when you take this to the forge, the notches are going to stay. So we're going to head over to the forge. Well, now we're over at the noisy forge area, and here is my rod, and it's got all the little marks in it exactly where I plan on bending it. So what we need to do is figure out how to hold it. You can use regular forge tongs, but the easy way is to just take the 1/4-inch rod and shove it right down the throat of a vice grip. So it fits right inside there, and now I clamp it together. Let's get it a little bit tighter. Now when I wiggle it, no matter what happens, it's not going to jump out of my hands. So I take this over to the forge, and I'm going to put this in at the first 1-inch mark. So I'm going to heat this up red hot at that first mark. That we're making, the first bend just is about at a 40-degree angle. So there's bend number 1 at the top, and I'm trying to bend that. So over on my forge, it looks nice and red, and we're ready to do the bend. So I bring this over, I set it right on top the fuller, and I'm just going to bend this. That's about how hard that was. Not a whole lot of work, but I've got it bent for my first bend. Now you don't want to touch that. Red means hot. Now the second bend is going to happen way down further. And let's take a look. The second bend, number 2, is right here. And there are 2 bends, and that's that last 1-inch spot where we marked it off. So way down in the middle of the rod, there was a distance that was 1 inch apart, and there are the 2 marks there. So that's the bend that I'm working on right now, and we're going to do that also over top of the fuller. So here are my 2 marks. It's not quite hot there yet, and I'm going to heat this up red hot right in this area, and I'm going to set it so that there's 1 mark and there's the other one, and I'll have it over the fuller, and I'm going to take my hammer and I'm going to hit right about there on this second mark. And if I hit it with 1 good swat right on that mark, this one will stay up, it'll bend down, and this should bend in the curve all in 1 motion. So over at the forge, let's get that heated up right on that 1-inch direction there. So this takes about a minute or so to get hot. You don't want to do any bending while it's black. You want it cherry red. because the metal will bend very easily if it's red. So we're getting there. It's just about right. When I bring this rod over to the anvil, I want to make sure that the bend that I did first, that number 1 bend, is pointing up. If it's pointing up when I bend the second one, then it'll be all right. So here I am over to the anvil, and you can see that this bend is pointing up, and I've lined up the 2 marks right here, and there I go. 1 shot, it's a little bit extra, and it's pretty close. It's still hot, and I can just twist it a little bit, but there I have, in 1 hit, I got the 1 bend that I needed. So that worked out well. Now, if it doesn't work out the first time, you can do it with 1,000 hits. It doesn't matter. Just keep bending, and you can bend all of this around. But if you can get it all to happen in 1 hit, that's even better for you. Now the last bend. So the last one, there are 2 marks right in the center here that are 3 inches apart, and that is going to be curved right around so that this tip here comes back and touches, and it forms the handle. So we need to heat up this very large 3-inch area. Looks like I've got my 3 inches and a little bit more heated up, so I'm ready to do the bends. Now back over to my anvil, and I've rotated the anvil so that the horn is facing you, and I really don't have to hit very hard. Look at this. I'm just bending it right around. You can hit on it, doesn't matter. So I'm just bending this around so that it lines up and the handle fits very nicely. Now there's a little bit of twisting I'll have to do. You can see that I've got a little bit of a twist. It's not quite in alignment right there, so that's no big deal. It's still red hot down there. Well, you know, that's good enough for my handle right there, and I'm happy with that. Now, the next step that I need to do is to remove the vice grip from this end, because I need to flatten the end of this rod just a little bit. But I cannot go in here and grab the end of the handle with my hand. It's going to be far too hot. You can cool it, you can wait for time, but if you want to just speed it up and get it done quickly, all you have to do is you get another vice grip, and here I've got another vice grip in my hand, and I just take another vice grip like this, snap it down onto the other end. Now I can take off the first vice grip. There, I've got that. And I'm going to flatten this end down a little bit so it fits on the handle. Make sure that the open end of the handle is on the bottom when you flatten it down. So back to the forge, and I'm just going to heat this end up a little red. So there we are. We'll just get it right in the hot spot on the forge. back to the anvil. That's about it. You don't need a whole lot. That's hardly an inch long, and it squashed it down so it's less than, almost an eighth of an inch thick, or about 3 millimeters thick. Back to the drill press again, and I have put a center punch mark in about 4 millimeters from the end of this flattened area on the rod, and that's where I'm going to drill. We're only going to drill one hole at this time, and then we're going to put one rivet in to fasten it together. So I'm just going to hang on to the one end of the handle, and I'm going to drill. Down it goes through that center punch mark. After it goes through the center punch mark, I want you to lift up and down on the handle, again, just to clean the hole out. The rivets will be just a little bit too tight if you don't clean that hole out a little bit. We are nearly done. We need to fasten the blade and the handle together. So here's the hole that I just finished drilling into the handle, and it has a couple of burrs on it, so I'm just going to clean them off with the file. There. Now, the handle, there's the bottom of the handle, because this is where the rod comes in. The open is on the bottom, so I'm going to pull that out here, and that's the bottom. That should go underneath the blade. Should go underneath the blade. And so that means that I'm going to put the rivet in from the bottom. Then I find the best side of the blade, and I'll put it up, and I line that up with the rivet. And it may or may not go through, depending on how well you cleaned out the hole on the drill press. But that's why we have a little rivet set. The rivet set has a hole in it, and it has a dimple. And the idea is that you first set the hole onto the rivet, and I give it a couple of taps with the hammer. That just forces everything to go through and to be squished together. Then I take the rivet set and I put the dimple on top of the rivet, and this time I hammer it until the rivet bends over. And there I've got a nice round head on the rivet. So far it's fastened together, but it could move. You see how this moves? That's not good. So the second rivet needs to go in, and we put the second rivet in only after we've done the first one. So now I take my center punch, and I align the center punch up exactly where I would like the hole, and it looks like it's almost 5 millimeters away, not too close to the edge. And I've got the center punch mark there. And back I go to the drill press, and this time I'm going to drill the hole right through both of them, and that again is a 1/8 of an inch hole. So there I've drilled the second hole. And once again, I'll just take the file and just clean that a little bit so that there's no burr sticking up. I put the rivet, that's a tinner's rivet, and I put that rivet in from the bottom. That's not a pop rivet. This is a tinner's rivet where it has to be hammered on. It's a soft metal. So I put that rivet in from the bottom. It doesn't go through all the way when I push it with my fingers, and that's again why we have the rivet set. I align it with the hole, and I put it so it's completely squished together. And now I put the dimple on there, and I now have two nice round heads, and on the other side they're flat. It may not be perfectly aligned, but that step is later where we fix that up. So now I've got a flipper blade. I need to put a coating on the handle so that I don't see this ugly metal, and so it does not rust. So I need to put the coating on. Before I put the coating on, I need to sand it a little bit. I'm going to use some emery cloth, and I'm just going to sand the metal. The emery cloth will just clean this up a little bit. I don't have to sand it until it shines. I just have to sand it to get rid of a lot of that carbon that got cooked out of the metal as I had it in the forge. When you heat up metal, it cooks the carbon out of it, and so it comes to the surface, and I want to clean that off because the plastic will not stick as well if I don't clean it. So I just rough it up everywhere. So we'll be right back after I finish sanding all of this, and we will show you how to fasten on the plastic. Well, we're at the step where we need to heat up the handle so that we can make some plastic powder stick to it. So I have here a brazing torch, and we'll get a decent sized flame. And I'm just going to heat this handle up. You notice that I'm just holding on to the blade, because I'm not going to heat up the blade. I don't need any vice grips or anything. So I aim this fire onto the handle and heat it up. It's not going to be red. It's not even going to be blue or orange or any other weird colors. It might start to turn a little brown, but that's it. We want it to melt so it gets smooth, but we need it to stick to the rod. Otherwise it'll just peel off too quickly. You can see there I've got a few hot spots. It's starting to turn kind of a purplish color. Now I'm just going to test it to see how hot it is. I'm going to put it up near my face, and I can feel the heat. That's a distance of about 10 centimeters or half a foot away. And I can feel the heat, so that means that I'm probably okay to melt the plastic. So we'll just set this brazing torch down, and I go over to the plastic bucket. So in here is just powder, and I'm just going to dip it down in there a little bit and splash it up. So there I've got a layer of plastic on top of the rod, and you can see that it's starting to melt. Back to my brazing torch, and I'm just going to smoothen out the plastic. I don't really want a fire going on. Okay. And it's bubbling in there because there's a fan blowing air up through the powder. If you let it burn, it'll get too brown. The color will change. I've got one more layer of plastic to put on. One more layer. And hopefully this layer does not burn. I don't want to jam it too hard down into this bucket, because if it jams too hard, it'll disrupt what it looks like on the bottom. So very carefully, and let's just, that looks good. And the last time that I'm going to heat this up and smoothen out all of this plastic. Looks pretty smooth. You don't want to touch that because it will definitely stick to your fingers quite handily, and it will hurt. So for the next few minutes you might want to hold it or if you can get near some water without burning somebody, because as soon as this touches your clothes or skin, it's going to hurt like crazy. We are so close. We're almost done. One of the things we need to do at this point is to just give it a little bit of a bend so that it sits at a little better angle on the barbecue. So I'll just put it into the vise, and I'm going to squeeze it on the rivets. Squeeze it on the rivets. If I don't squeeze on the rivets, you're not going to get it bent properly. So I'm just going to bend it up just a little bit, and it doesn't take very much. And you can see the angle that that is at now. If it is not straight, so if I look at it and it's not straight in line with the blade and maybe the handle goes off to one side a little bit, again you can put it in the vise, and this time I'm just going to squeeze sideways on the rod. So I'll pretend mine is crooked here a little bit, and I can just bend it just a little bit sideways like that, and it'll straighten it up. The last step is to just make sure that all of those filed edges are smooth. So I take a little wet and dry sandpaper and I sand on the edges. Don't squeeze the sandpaper around the flat surfaces, otherwise you're going to put big marks in it. But I'm just sanding along the edges here and on the bottom and a little bit around those curves that I made there. And now I can feel with my hand, and I do not feel anything that's going to snag and cut me.